Hey folks, welcome back. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am the co-founder and general partner of 8-Bit Capital, and I have this podcast, Something Ventured, and thank you so much for listening. What a great episode today. Vern Howard, the guest, and obviously on this podcast, I try to do something a little different from your average Silicon Valley podcast. It takes you down some darker alleys from time to time. But that's okay because it's just such an amazing story in general where you'll just go from one thing. Vern, he graduates high school early and then is a great lacrosse player and goes to Capital One and is this like ridiculous rising star and then becomes Look, you'll listen to the podcast, you'll see what I'm talking about. The title of this episode, Vern is Not Your Delivery Man, comes from you can probably guess where it comes from. He's a black guy, entrepreneur, walks into a venture capital firm, and instead of saying, "Hello, who are you here to see?" they say, "Do you have a package for us?" Which, if you didn't already know, when somebody walks into your venture capital firm, unless they're actually wearing a UPS or FedEx outfit, ask them who they're there to see. But more interesting, and this will slip by you if I don't say it to you and let you be on the lookout for it, he mentions feeling uncomfortable in San Francisco and so moves to LA, which, I don't know, I live in San Francisco and that made me pause, and it might make you pause too. But in any case, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. Thank you so much for listening. The guest today, Vern Howard. All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I'm Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Vern Howard. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me, Kent.
This is. I really appreciate your coming on. This is great. Vern is the CEO and co-founder of Hallo, which I'll let him explain in a bit, but it's an events platform that connects people, develops authentic relationships with diverse candidates and companies. He did a whole bunch of things at Capital One before that and is on the Fortune Technology Council?
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of stuff going on. And you're a Vern Howard Jr., is that right?
Yeah.
What was your dad up to when you were getting started? You kind of came out to a fast start.
Yeah. So my dad is like a mathematician by trade. He graduated with a math degree. So I guess that's why I graduated high school at 16. I was really gifted in math.
Yeah.
And then he was like one of the first COBOL programmers at Capital One. He built out Capital One's credit risk model.
Wow.
The EDS and he's like OG tech guy.
So what the heck is going on that you're getting out of high school at like 16? Is that even a good idea?
Yeah, no, it's actually a terrible idea. My mom wanted me to stay another year, but my teachers were just like, "Yo, this kid, he needs to skip up a grade because I'd get so bored."
Right.
Which also happens in adult life. If I don't have challenges,
right,
I get super bored, and that's what happened in school. And I was playing lacrosse at the time, so I was just really only focused on sports and having fun. So,
yeah.
And
where did you grow up?
Rochester, New York. So.
I was going to say, I grew up in San Diego, and like at least when I was growing up, lacrosse was just it's just not a thing.
Yeah, it's just because upstate New York, a lot of Indian reservations, and then Syracuse obviously is like the thing there. So
you get into, is it Virginia Commonwealth early?
Yeah. So what I did is I graduated at 16. I wanted to figure out what I wanted to do. And I told my mom, she went to RIT, so technology school. I wanted to start a hedge fund, but I didn't know how to bankroll it. And she was like, I don't have the money to bankroll it. So I took a job. This is a crazy story. I took a job at UPS because I didn't know what to do. Right. My mom was like, okay, she'll listen to this, I guess. And she used to call me like a loser. She's like, you're a loser. You're just going to go, you're so super smart. You're going to work at UPS. And I was working there for like a year, and my boss and I got into an argument. He's like, dude, you're lazy. You're never going to do anything but work for me here at UPS. And obviously for me, as you'll hear from my stories, like I like challenges. So I was like, oh, what? Like I'm leaving. So I called my dad. He was in Richmond, Virginia. And I was like, yeah, I want to go to college. I don't know how to enroll. I don't know what to do. And he was like, where's your SAT scores? And I sent them, and they were pretty decent. I tested pretty high in math, and he took me to Virginia, and he was like, okay, here's VCU, U of R, UVA, choose one. And I ended up choosing VCU and like matriculating in. I was out of school for so long. They were like, yo, Vern, you have to take 3 classes a semester for 2 semesters, pay out of pocket, and you have to get a 4.0. It's all comp sci classes. And then we'll let you do school.
So you're on the UPS to hedge fund path.
Right.
when you decide to go to college. And so now how are you paying for this whole thing? Is it
Yeah. So 2 things. One, when I was in college, I used to, no one knows this too. I was like a cool kid in college too. After classes at night, overnight, I was a janitor at VCU. So I was a janitor.
Yeah.
It's a crazy story. I would actually clean some of my classrooms after, like overnight, which sucked. And I also taught algebra. So middle school algebra at Elkhart Middle School in Richmond, Virginia. So they actually wanted me to come on as a teacher, like full time. At one point, I was just like, no, that's not what I wanted to do.
So not so lazy after all.
No. Of course not. Just like not inspired, right?
And by the way, the crappy job, I grew up, relatively, I grew up in San Diego working at like a beach club, but, as like the whatever, clean the sand off the rich people's, whatever. Man, those crappy jobs really make you appreciate, jobs that have air conditioning and,
for sure. I'm like, there's nothing that I would find. And now being a founder and CEO, you have to do so many other different roles. I'm like, there's nothing that I wouldn't do. Or one of my employees the other day, she said, no, Vern, I don't want you to do that. You're the CEO. And I'm like, yeah, but I lead from the front. So it's nothing I won't do, to help out.
Yeah, in hiring people over the years, you kind of meet some people who have just never had a crappy job. Like they spent the summer, working for their senator, and then they went to, Nicaragua on a peace mission. And like, they just can't imagine, putting on a suit and tie every day and getting on going to a commercial bank and, doing a GL or whatever the hell the crappy job is.
Yeah. It's a lot. And for me, I think in life, I used to see 2 different sides of the tracks, right? Like single parent home style, and then going to the crappy jobs within lacrosse. Obviously, I used to do lacrosse and played hockey for a while, and then going to PGA, and I had exposure to all those kids who had that lifestyle for sure. So,
man, you were really doing the not black guy sports.
I'm not actually talented in any of the black guy sports, so not football or basketball. So.
Well, I'm not talented at either lacrosse or hockey. So, there you go. So how do you come out? So you come out of this, and then how do you end up like you don't go off and become a hedge fund manager or an entrepreneur right away? You go work for a big company, right?
Yeah. So I went to VCU, got through the program, awesome time. Got to the career fair with 2 companies, JPM and Capital One. So JPM was pure sales and trading, Wall Street, $50,000 a year, no signing bonus. That was, I think it wasn't a meaningful one. So in college, I was rebuilding a car, Alpha Romeo Milano, 88. Oh, wow. I was rebuilding it. My dad had one in college, and then I bought one and rebuilt it too. And
isn't that a little? How tall are you? Is that like a little car?
It's small. I'm like 5'8", so it's like perfect for me. The only bad thing is like if I would go on dates, it's so finicky. The electronics, like one time the back windows just dropped down and it started raining.
Of course.
Right. Fun project car though. But yeah, I wanted to rebuild the car, and Capital One gave me a pretty big bonus, and I rebuilt the engine, which was fun. And it ended up breaking like 3 months later. But also Capital One pitched me and said, Vern, our competition isn't Morgan Stanley, it's Facebook. And this was 2012. So like fintech, digital banking wasn't hugely known about, but like Caribou and like Nigel and the Capital One guys were big on that kind of stuff. And I took the job and moved to DC and did a ton of different roles there. Yeah.
And what kind of roles did you do? I mean, did you like banking? Did you say, oh, this is this is my path to this hedge fund career finally?
Right. So I like math a ton. So when I got to Capital One, it was 2 tracks. I got into the technology rotational program. You get there, you're like, you're filling out what you want to do. So they're like, we're going to work on this. They had just acquired ING. They're like, we're going to build this native mobile banking application for Capital One. So Capital One used to have their mobile app in like a frame, which was terrible. Right. So I was on the team that helped build that out. Half of my time was spent on product management, and the other half was spent in QE automation. So just using Gherkin to run scripts for testing, Ruby, which was fun. I did that, launched it, got the demo to the CEO. It was an awesome time. But then I'm like, okay, I want to do something else. And I was like, I want to do something more technical. And they were like, do you want to come on the application engineering team as a hacker? I'm like, well, what is that, right? It sounds like a TV show.
Right.
So I joined the application security team, and I get this thing called a CEH with some guys from the NSA and CIA, tested in the 1 percentile. I think I missed like one question. I crammed the exam. So I studied for like the day before. And I joined the team as like hacking the web app that I just built, the web app version of it and the mobile app. to like move money around and find vulnerabilities in the code. So it's fun. Yeah.
That's really cool. So how do you start making your way into the entrepreneurial world? Did you you start reaching out to some famous folks, or how do you start like thinking about that?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, in Capital One, like Google's Google of the West Coast, but in the East Coast, Capital One's like the Google of the East Coast. Like tons of smart people came from there. The Street Shares guys, for sure. The guys who started Shift. So Toby Russell over at Taxi, he started Taxi Magic and then Shift. So tons of entrepreneurs at Capital One. And I didn't know that until I just started doing research. I get like going to these rabbit holes. I read 100 books. Like one of those years I was at Capital One, I was like reading on trading and starting companies and like Mark Cuban's book and some books rework. And Capital One was like sending me around the country to talk to students about my story that I just told you. And I'm just like, okay, cool. Recruiting's broken. Seems like we can build a community around all these different population subsets. So women, minorities, I mean, even white males in Idaho who want access to information. It's two broken things. It's like the access to knowledge on careers and then the network. If you have both of those, you'll figure it out. If you're a smart hustler, right? Like I did, you'll figure it out.
Right.
If I can make it easier for you to get in the know, then you'll figure it out even quicker. I told Capital One about my idea to like build this online community that lets companies talk to students real time at scale and collect data on these interaction touch points. And they were like, this is not possible. So I was like, okay, I'm going to build it. And once I build it, I'm going to charge you guys for it. So I built out this platform early. It was like a forum. And I just went around to schools, Howard University, Georgetown University, and George Washington University. I was like, hey, Google's here, Facebook's here, Coinbase is here. I think it was like it's another company like Geico. I was like, you can ask them questions real time.
Right.
And respond. And students are just like, okay, none of these companies come to our school. So I asked them questions and I would take them, send them on LinkedIn to the recruiter and they'd answer them on my forum.
Right.
It became a community. And I literally took a book and pitched Ted Leonsis, who's case partner. It's his book called Rework. I actually pitched him in the cover and sent it to the Verizon Center, which, you know, he owns Wizards and all the sports teams there in DC. And he read it and he was like, yo, your handwriting, I don't understand it. But it seems like he kind of pitched me, right? He probably just knew. And he wrote me back and I was like, yo, come to the office. And once I kind of got into Ted's network, I met the guys at Growtech, and then I met Steve Case, and then I met Human and the guys. And then it was kind of like flywheel.
That is kind of crazy. And so how did it eventually get funded? Like, did one of them say, I'm pulling out my checkbook, or what?
Right. So two people I met that kind of accelerated was one, Ted Leonsis. He kind of introduced me to this network of people. Mike Lincoln over at Cooley was like, yo, everyone at DC is raving about you. Like, essentially you're like this, no one knows who you are. You didn't go to Ivy League school. You're not from this like background. You're just like hustling into all these offices to the point where like, you know, OG Novak Biddle guys are like, Vern, right? It's like, you know, people are just like, hold on, who? And they're like, who's this kid Vern, right? So Cooley's just like, yo, we're going to handle your legal work for you right now. And you, obviously, you know, you pay us when you get funded. So that was awesome. And then I get this intro to Human Radford from one of the old AdThis guys. I flew out to Soho to pitch the guys at Expo. I had tried to pitch Expo a while back. They passed, pitched them again. I got into this room. They're literally this like no name or signage on the door. Walk into this room. It's like Human from AdThis, the founder of Foursquare, Naveen, Vitor from the first designer at Twitter, Roberto, the partner at Expo and former AdThis and LinkedIn. And then obviously then Garrett Camp walks in and I'm like, wow, it's the co-founder of Uber. This is amazing. Yeah. And they were like, oh, pitch me. And I pitched him on this idea that it's like diversity is not broken. All these pipelines and these problems aren't really broken in the sense of what we thought it was before. And I also pitched them on the fact that job postings are like broken. It's not about the job posting. It's about if we can actually let students get access to the network to build the skills they need before they get a job, the know-how, and then the network to act on that, we'd build a solution that everyone could get a job, right? Because they could figure it out versus like going to a job posting, sending your resume, and then it just breaks. And they were super into it. They were like, let's see if you can build it. And they gave me I think 14 days to decide. I think one of those guys at Expo were like, hey, but you gotta move from DC. You have to move to San Francisco. Yeah. So San Francisco, June 2017. And since then we built this out, scaled to 100 companies and 1,225 universities on the platform. And there's only 5 of us on the team and we've raised 1.9 million altogether now.
That's incredible. Yeah. So what is going on? Well, first of all, as you go around and talk to these people around the country, are you an example? Like you're a kind of a math prodigy who got out of high school early. So you have the formula for like math geniuses who get out of high school early. But what about I'm pretty good at English.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is like a combination, right? So one, they're like, this kid's for sure the math prodigy, but then he has a different track because he didn't go to Princeton, right? So he took this time off and then he went to VCU, which cool, decent school, but it's not like top tier by any means. And then he still kind of like figures his way out to like go from building apps at Capital One to being a hacker at Capital One. And I ended my career at Capital One on the trading floor, actually, in derivatives. So I started trading my bonus and they hired me to sit on the trading floor. So it's like this trajectory. They're just like, this kid is like very different, right?
Yeah.
And you don't think about it later, but they're like, this kid's different and he's going to do something else. But like, you can see he kind of forged his own journey at Capital One. Students,
how'd you like the trading thing?
It wasn't what I thought. I'll say that. You watch all these movies, right? Like Room and Wall Street and everything else. And it was fun for the first, I'll say like 5 or 6 months. It was intense. Tons of traders don't know how to book trades in this platform called Murex, which is an IT platform, and it's super technical. There's so many configurations, like you actually have to know how to code. So I would help those guys book trades in Murex. The biggest thing is sometimes they'd be trading at different desks at different time zones, and like you'd get a break in a trade that's huge at like 4 o'clock in the morning. It's kind of like your social life, but it was fun for a while. And then after that, just was like, I want to go deep on this entrepreneurial path. And I just kept seeing Capital One use me as this positioning piece to go around like, look at this kid. He's come from like all these different experiences. Like he's who we're trying to get more of. And I was like, well, what if I scale the analog version of me going around and let you just do it online in communities and pull data from these interactions to be a better place.
And what is going on with that? I've had, I don't know, do you know Michael Ellison or the Code Path guys at all?
Yep. So Michael's awesome.
So, and so there, what is this thing where there's like this infinite demand for people who can code or work a computer, and yet nobody shows up at these colleges, and there's all these college students struggling to connect like that. Like, what is that?
Yeah. So I think it's a 2-pronged problem. One is like these are businesses, right? So there's budget, and budget. Once you start talking about like numbers and budgets and like even pulling in the VC language, like what's the ROI here?
Yeah.
And every recruiter and HR team is just like, okay, great. If we spend $100,000 to go to 31 schools this season, what's the ROI? Now, if we go to Stanford or we go to Michigan, we kind of know the ROI there because some of our current engineers went to school there. So we know their level of output is as far as coding goes. But if we take a risk and go with something we haven't done before, like going to Sweetbriar College, which is like a female all-women's college in Virginia. The founder of TaskRabbit, Leah, she actually went to Sweetbriar, right? So but we take a risk there and we go there, we don't know the ROI. So we might lose $50,000 and have no ROI to show. So the best bet, it's much like VC culture, the best bet is just go, we go to Stanford, we get 3 students, great. But what happens is the competition there, right? If your brand isn't as big as you think it is as a company, when you go to Stanford, well, then your line is like non-existent. Everyone went over to, Robinhood's line or.
But then they bounced around 5 times in the first, Exactly. I mean, it seems to me it would be a good bet. I worked at Deloitte and they would not hire at Stanford necessarily because they were Deloitte and they weren't McKinsey. And, McKinsey wasn't Goldman Sachs. And so they would go to San Jose State and they'd hire somebody who was just thrilled to be in an air-conditioned office and would work for Deloitte for 10 years without, and be thrilled.
Yeah. So it goes back to this thesis of like, how do you find, and that's what we're building. And that's why we use a ton of data. It's not just about going to talk to these communities and like reaching more women or more minorities or more whatever your goal is, even as a university or regions in the country. But how do you pull data to actually go and show ROI? So like for your example, we went and got this guy from San Jose State and he worked his ass off. I don't know if I can curse on here, but I did. Yeah, he worked his tail off to like show the ROI of like, wow, we should hire more people like him because he's going to work for 10 years here, right? He pays that's the ROI in itself. And we need to teach companies that that's what they need to do is find untapped talent instead of going to the same places they've been all the time.
So how's it go? Like, so you've got this idea, you see the problem, obviously it's a thing. You launch you launch your company. How is it going? Like, what are you learning and how's the real world versus the sort of theory of the thing?
Right. So initially when we launched this, it was 2018 in February, right? 2 things is we noticed a ton of students wanted to get involved, but the market wasn't heating up around this. So there's two aspects, right? Businesses, in a sense, were like, we know we need to figure this out, but there was no pressure. There was no pressure for them to figure it out. They're just like, whatever. I gave $100,000 to this diversity organization, or like, great, I'm gonna go. There was no pressure, and students were like signing up in droves. So around that time in 2018, we had around 53 colleges on the platform, which was decent, right? We'd only raised $500K. We weren't spending money on marketing. The CAC was super low. It was 3 people on the team. We get to like 2019, 2020, where we're at now. Well, first COVID hit and we couldn't have planned for that. But now what we're seeing is businesses are just like, wow, I could have done what I've been doing manually the whole time online.
Right.
So we're seeing tons of businesses sign up. So the largest ones in the US have been signing up and paying for this platform to host these online events with targeted communities, depending on what their goals are for the year, and after pulling these data sets. But we actually saw students double down on Hallo. So we scaled 410% in a single day on Hallo. Yeah. One day we scaled 410%. And then thereafter, we've been growing around 30% month over month just on the student side. And we scaled to 1,225 universities today. So, and that's still with just a team of 5, right? So we only had 2 to 3 more people. I think what's interesting now is we're in a space where companies are taking this very seriously, diversity, and just building their brand online. But also students don't see a way back of going to career fairs. I don't think that'll ever happen again.
Yeah. So are students prepared? The classic joke is that people come out of people come out of law school and, they know all these Supreme Court cases and labor law and Uruguay, but they don't know how to incorporate a company.
Right.
Like our tech students coming out of college able to do whatever Capital One needs, like do an AWS spin up or whatever it is.
Right. So a majority of them are. So here's what's interesting about us. Every time we talk to a student or we onboard them to Hallo, we actually pull certain aspects about them, like projects they've been working on, GitHub, even like if you're a coder for sure, GitHub or designer, those kind of things. We pull all those aspects about you to understand like what you are good at. And what we notice is like, once we figure out what you're good at, the company wants to see this because it becomes like this kind of micro internship task where they're like, oh, wow. So Kent's been killing it on GitHub, checking in code at least once a week. Maybe we give him a case study at Robinhood to build us out an engine to recommend the best stocks. And once you see this kid at San Jose State being able to build this recommendation engine for you, you're like, wow, we should hire this kid to do this and build something in. So what we're noticing is like the more projects that students are doing outside of like their daily school tasks, which tons of students are doing these side gig projects, the better off they are when they apply to a job and show the recruiter like, hey, I can actually do this real-time work. So yes, the answer to your question is yes, that a lot of them can do the work. They just don't have the opportunity to get inside the organization.
So what happens to your company? I mean, are you seeing more access or more people trying? The classic VC thing to say is, and Charles Hudson was kind of eloquent about this when he was on the podcast, where he's like, look, if you're in Silicon Valley, you should be able to get to me. Like if you went to Stanford, you should know how to get to me. But if you went to, Southern Kentucky State or whatever, I get it. Like you can cold email me because I get that you don't have the normal path. Like are pathways opening up as a result of what you're doing here with the platform?
Yeah. So we're seeing a ton of pathways open up. And I'll say the reason being is that people naturally gravitate. Example, right? Outside of Hallo, you and I can add you on LinkedIn tomorrow. And if I didn't know you, you likely wouldn't accept me. But once we do the podcast, we know each other, we share commonalities. After that, you accept me. And what's happening is once people can join these sessions with a recruiter or an employee from the company, after you say, hey, I met you on Hallo in that event the other day, they're 9 times out of 10, they're going to accept you on LinkedIn and follow up in a message. So we actually have a success story. A young lady, Erica, she was on our platform. She joined an event for an Atlassian. She had no idea what Atlassian was. She joined as a designer. And after she emailed the recruiter on LinkedIn, she's like, hey, I just met you on Hallo. And the recruiter was like, great. Do you have your resume? She sent her a resume. She now works at Atlassian as a designer.
Wow.
Had no access to Atlassian. The thing we notice is if you can build that relationship online, people are so used to it that they'll continue the conversation with you. If you have the skills and the grit, then they're like, why wouldn't I bet on her? So yeah. For sure.
So what happens next for Hallo? Is it another funding round, or what's the next thing?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing is like for us. So 2 things about raising. One, raising is for sure challenging. I think this space is for sure heating up. We see like a ton of online events platforms raising a good amount of money at this point now.
Yeah.
So that's amazing that people are finally waking up to understand this is a space. I've been like standing on my soapbox since 2014. So now everyone gets it, which is exciting. But I think for us, we've been like really fortunate to do a lot with a little. So we've been able to, one, keep up with these kind of conglomerate, bigger brand organizations that have raised, 100, $200 million of funding. Yeah. For us, we've been able to keep up with them so much so that we're still able to scale to tons of universities and some of the biggest companies in the US right now. So raising is interesting, but not something that we're super, super focused on. But if the right opportunity presents itself, for sure, we take it.
Yeah, I worked in Silicon Valley for a while. I still don't. So the company Hopin, which is one of these, it's
they
spelled
just
Hopin, but Hopin, and they raised like 130. And I think they just pivoted into this thing like 9 months ago. Raised like 130 million or something like that. Yeah, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'd have like a party with the Foo Fighters, and then I'd have like 134.8 million left. Like. It's stunning when that happens.
Yeah. I mean, it's stunning on both sides, right? As a founder, it's for sure stunning because, it's great. I guess I'm super excited that the market is heating up. That there's that much money to deploy in the online event space. But yeah, I mean, it is a ton of money. I'm like a big proponent. I'm like a big fan of just keeping the round concentrated on our side. So.
Yeah, stay focused. So what's going on? You did the Hallo research, I think, the report on Black funding.
Yep.
And the stat that I think I copied correctly is that 1,300 startups raised funding in Q3 of 2020.
Yep.
31 of them, which is 0 as a percent. You're the math guy, but that's 0 as a percent. In my world, were Black founders.
Yeah.
What's the... I thought racism was over. We had the... election and
I know.
Like everything's solved.
It's super funny. I posted this the other day on my Twitter, and like a ton of founders I know retweeted it or reposted it. I remember I was telling a close friend when I was in San Francisco. I lived in San Francisco for 3 years, and great place, but for sure just wasn't kind of my speed. So I ended up relocating the office to LA.
Really? What didn't you like? Didn't feel like what didn't you like?
Yeah, I didn't feel. It's funny. We have this discussion, and I think it's awesome. Like that, you're like, hey, wow, you're like a diamond in the rough founder. Like you did this, you did that, and the story is like it's an awesome movie, and hopefully A24 picks it up, right?
That's right.
But yeah, I mean, you're pitching this into some for sure VCs and investors who are looking at this. They're kind of trying to figure out what box to put me in as a founder. I would imagine. The story is just very different. And for someone who looks like me coming in telling that story, it's probably a bit different. So yeah, I think the funding environment was a bit different in San Francisco. I moved to LA January 2020, and in that time, I was able to raise around 80% of my round in 3 weeks.
Yeah. Wow.
Night and day. I actually took a ton of time in San Francisco raising money. One, determining the market, which, as you said, now Hopin's proving out that the market is here.
Yeah.
But also just kind of letting VCs bet on me. I think the biggest thing, I posted one of these blogs that I kind of try to align myself with a ton of people in San Francisco who'd done it successfully and who'd been around and knew a ton of people. And even with that and those introductions and other things, I'd kind of get essentially the runaround on a lot of investing opportunities. So yeah, I mean,
but LA works out a lot better.
LA, I mean, it's not perfect, but it's definitely a bit better environment. But once you start to get to larger, institutional rounds, for sure, San Francisco is where a good amount of VCs are, as I'm sure you know. Yeah.
So why relatively few, even proportionately few Black founders out of the 1,300 startups?
Yeah, I think some of the stories are unrelatable, right? So what we're seeing is a ton of the VCs they do come from the culture of like they grew up in Santa Barbara, or they grew up in Silicon Valley, or they grew up somewhere else. And then like a kid comes in and tells you like, hey, I'm from Detroit. And I grew up in a single parent home, and I had to like hustle my way out of this environment to get to, and this is literally my co-founder's story, right? I grew up in a single parent home in Detroit and like with my mom and my brother, and then I had to hustle my way out and I had the highest GPA in all of Detroit because I went to one of the top schools and I had a full ride scholarship to any college I wanted to. So I chose Notre Dame academically, and I went to work at California. That story for them, they're just like, what? What? Hold on, you chose Notre Dame, you had a scholarship anywhere. Why didn't you go to Stanford? Like the story, they don't get the aspects of the story. I call it distance traveled. Like, we laugh and my story is interesting, I guess, but like as a VC, if you sit down and you're like, wow, this kid raised just under $2 million since 2017. He's been able to scale to 1,225 universities with obviously he didn't have money to spend on the marketing, so the CAC's pretty low. He's scaled to 80 companies on the platform. He's built out this unique technology with video and it's proprietary with 5 people.
Yeah.
I think he's pretty good for a decent sized Series A. Oh, he's also revenue. He's taking in revenue as well.
Yeah.
Right. But the story still, even if we show Hopin or other organizations who've done the same thing with more, but we've done it with less, it won't come across the same. And I think that distance travel story is like the biggest thing I'm seeing that's just not hitting home with VCs. They don't understand how hard a Black founder might have to work to get in front of them. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I joke about, hopefully I do it right on this podcast, but listen to other ones where, the diversity of VC stories is about zero in the sense that they went to either Princeton or Harvard or Stanford.
Yep.
And they got their VC job. Rarely is the story, well, ever since I was, what I wanted to invest, it's always like, oh, I fell into it. Yep. Like my brother's, dad ran, you've heard of it or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And when I had Monique Woodard on, who's a venture capitalist, and she came out of like rural Florida.
Yeah.
Not a great place to be a Black woman, by the way, rural Florida. And it's like, but you've never heard that story. The next 100 stories will not include rural Florida. They'll include Harvard or Stanford, sometimes U of I, but not that often. It's kind of incredible. Even as we try to be more open and all of that, the actual paths that we've taken are all pretty narrow.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. And I saw Monique, she's one of also the first kind of people I met early in San Francisco. She's amazing, super smart. Yeah. Same with Charles Hudson. I think one thing I just see is like amongst the Black founder community is like ton of mentors, right? I think Black founders are, over mentored and underfunded. And I don't know who coined that term, but like ton of people want to mentor. Like
that's funny.
I have people flooding my inbox from the top VCs in the nation and just say, hey, Vern, I'd mentor you. Let me be your mentor. And, I'm always greatly appreciative of like advice and mentorship and, even some of the great VCs I've been able to work with. But also what is truly beneficial is also like, funding the company, right? Because that's also ultimately how you grow and remain competitive, so.
Well, and funding the business too. I think, I've talked to, unfortunately, a lot of Black founders who or fund managers who people want to give them money, like for a fund, like, oh, I'll give you your money out of our foundation. And they're like, well, no, you want to invest your money and then triple it, you be greedy. Yeah. Like look at me and be greedy.
Yeah.
Would be the,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Like really take time to say, this is a bet. This is not just like a write-off essentially, or like a drop in a bucket,
So what would you prescribe for, people who want to be helpful, or for San Francisco that obviously didn't, make you feel super welcome? Like, you're on your path, but for the rest of us, like what should be happening? Like, what is the thing we're not getting right here?
Right. I think it's like the biggest thing I'm seeing is like, one, as a nation now, where a ton of us, you mentioned election and all this other stuff, a ton of us are waking up to like the divisions. I remember I had a conversation maybe a year ago or 2 years ago with a VC, and he's like, Vern, the world isn't that bad. I can't believe that the world's that bad, that like some people aren't making bets because of these things or this kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, well, great. Eventually and time shows that was incorrect. But I think also just understanding the stories and distance travel to founders, I keep like doubling down on this because I think it's huge. It's just like, if you sit down as a VC and you're like, especially at the early stages, it's like, okay, cool. Likely this kid or whoever, couldn't raise friends and family around because it's not possible for sure for most Black founders.
Right.
They were able to hustle this bootstrap story together to get here. and also wrap up some sort of institutional capital to get to a certain place and the metrics and the growth, and like hustle to get all the way in front of my office and in my face to have like a 45-minute meeting with me. Like how hard was that versus like to your point, the kid who went to Stanford went to the professor and got the introduction and they're here now about to raise money. I think as a VC, if you sit down and actually like value that story and like look through it and say like, wow, how hard would this kid go to make this company successful? I think that's one thing. And I think a lot of Black founders also, we don't have, on our side, we feel like once we raise money, like failure is not an option. I think that's like a closed circuit. So that's for fund managers and that's for founders, right? So like you feel like, wow, I don't have the privilege to fail at all. So you just, and I think
that's a different, there's the risk of, I wonder about that risk aversion thing because I had a Vincent Robinson who works in Silicon Valley, but he was at Goldman Sachs. And he said he went to his Stanford, of course, reunion, and all the sort of Black men and women he'd work with had not become entrepreneurs. They'd all gone to Goldman Sachs and McKinsey. And he posited was, well, these guys have all been through shit and they don't think life is super awesome and everything's perfect. So when Goldman Sachs says, do you want $600,000 a year? They're like, yeah, I do. They're not like, whatever, I'm going to roll the dice. And then if that doesn't work, I'll go work at my family office.
Yep. Because it's not an option, and you're weighing all these different things, right? Like you're weighing. I remember for me to build this company when I first started. It's like before I met, did the thing with Ted to send the book. I liquidated my 401k, sold all my furniture in my apartment, sold my car, and I slept on my friend's floor on his mattress in his kitchen. It was like an apartment, a 1-bedroom, so the mattress was literally next to the kitchen. Every morning he'd wake up for work and I'd smell him like cooking breakfast. It was like that bad. And I like got all the way down to spending every dime I had in my 401k. And then I happened to life has serendipity moments where I ended up meeting Garrett and those guys at Expo.
Yeah.
When I got to San Francisco, I remember I didn't have enough money to check into a hotel.
Yeah. That's the entrepreneur story.
Yeah, but that's not,
It's not, I know it's not fun at the time, but that's a freaking incredible story, man.
Yeah.
So so how are you feeling about the future now? We've had an election and, some people are trying to make things better in Silicon Valley. What's your take on the
I think I learned this from my dad is always assume positive intent. So I'm super optimistic of the future, and I'm like a true CEO, right? Never had a bad meeting. It's always good. I'm very optimistic about how things can change and they will change for the better. I think more founders and CEOs, myself and others in the market who do have success and wins, they create an ecosystem where more VC funds will feel better betting on people of color and minorities. So I'm super optimistic. I think there's a lot of room here, and I think more VCs will step up to the plate to bet on founders who look like me and come from my kind of background.
Yeah, and I think too, when your company becomes an even bigger success and a unicorn, that'll kind of probably propel it along a bit too.
Yeah, for sure. Because then I can put money back into the ecosystem, which is something that I'm really excited about. I think being a VC coming from the founder side and then doing VC for a while seems super exciting. Just seeing others like whom and Radford doing and Garrett and those other guys, I think that's super exciting and something that's inspirational. So it's
not going to be a hedge fund.
No. I'll leave all my hedge fund dreams on Showtime on Billions, man.
Such a good show. So how should people get in touch with you or follow you or learn about you who don't already know?
Right. So definitely follow me on LinkedIn or add me. I'll accept you. No worries. I tweet a decent amount, but most of it's just music or random thoughts. But they're interesting.
What do you like? What do you recommend?
So right now I go down rabbit holes of music each week, and I change on Spotify. So right now I'm going down a lot of Eric Clapton's music.
Oh, nice.
So, so super interesting. I watched a documentary on George Harrison, and then
I was going to say underrated, but not really. George frickin' Harrison.
Yeah,
his music of what the Beatles did.
Yeah,
putting aside that John Lennon is the genius of. This has always been my guy, but what George Harrison did was amazing too.
Amazing. I mean, you think about songs like "As My Guitar Gently Weeps," and you're like, "Who wrote that?" And you're like, "Well, George Harrison helped do that." They just let Clapton play the solo because it was so complex. But Yeah, I mean, I go between like rock docs and music back and forth a ton. So I'm on my like, Derek and the Dominoes stuff right now. So we'll see.
Going back.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks so much for doing this, man. And congratulations on all your success so far. I know it's not over yet, but
yeah,
more
to go. But thank you so much for having me.
All right. This has been the Something About Your podcast. Vern Howard, my guest. Talk to you next time.